unless you've been living under a rock. He is the founder of the North Face, which is an absolutely iconic brand. He served as their CEO for 20 years. He's the author of multiple books, including Conquering the North Face, a book called Almost, and The Adventure of Leadership. He runs a consulting partnership called HK Consulting, which he's run for 33 years. He's a Stanford MBA. He is an absolute legend, and we are delighted to have him with us today. So before I ask my first question, Kathy, get us started. Thank you to Mike Perlow for putting that intro together. Hap, how are you, my friend?
Good. That's pretty dramatic introduction.
We don't mess around here.
It's great.
We're ready. This reminds me of a conversation that we had with Joe Foster, who's the 87-year-old founder of Reebok. And it's always so fascinating to talk to founders of these iconic brands where we know them as kind of this, gigantic company with a name that everybody knows. So it's going to be really fun to kind of go back to the humble beginnings. But before we get into anything with North Face, I was curious, your father passed away, I believe, while you were at Stanford.
Correct.
And he had started and was running a very successful wood products company, window frames, doors, and you took that business over. I'm very curious. Obviously, a wood products company and the North Face, two very different entities. What did you learn at that time when you were, kind of the person who had to step in? What did you learn at that time running that company?
Well, there are a number of things. Let me drop back just for a moment on that. I had an idiosyncratic background as I was going through education and life, and I was always an outlier, to use your term. And I became comfortable with that, but I did things in a different way. I spent most of my time in the outdoors. I was raised in Spokane, Washington, and that's what you do in your spare time. But in grade school, I was disruptive, and so they asked me to spend the last half of every day doing something other than be in the class. So I ran a school store. I ended up, they had me doing directed reading. I read the Transcendentalist. I read Thoreau, where he's saying, "And wilderness is a preservation of the earth." I tended to believe in that. I worked at a number of jobs that were ones which basically laboring, because I like to do that. And I also learned a lot about people. And I learned that diversity was critical to developing a great company. Also learned that education didn't necessarily define people's contribution. And anyway, as I continued to do those things, and as I said, I was sort of an outlier, ended up having to thrust into running the family company. When I got there, I had been around it, but when I got into the center of it, I realized that most of the values, which I thought were really vital, didn't exist there. I believed in ESG at a time before those letters were even known. I believed in environment. I believed in diversity. I believed in that. And this was a sort of white male dominated hierarchical old school company that was doing wood products, which had very little in the way of brand. And on top of that, they were cutting down forest with little regard to the environment. So as I was running that, besides the fact that everybody looked at me as being kind of young and not knowing what I was doing, which was an accurate thing, I realized that I could never be good in that environment. I was going to have to get rid of it. I was going to have to sell it because it just didn't comport with me. And I believe if you could match up your purpose, if you could match up your passion with your job, you're going to be at 120%. And I could see that at best there, I was going to be 100% of my capacity and probably closer to 80%. So I sold the company and then founded the company, the North Face, which really married my ideas. It was an environmentally focused, purpose-based, triple bottom line company that had as its DNA an exact mirror of what my passions and what my pursuits were about. So what I learned, first of all, was put yourself in a position where you believe in and live every single moment the values of the company.
I love it. Before we get into the absolutely amazing success of the North Face, I love the book that you wrote, Almost. Just an absolutely phenomenal book and an ode to failure.
Right.
And you talk about, tell us about Arctica,
Right.
because people don't know about the company.
Mhm.
And you write all about uh, really a 12-month period of time um, where things didn't turn out the way that you had planned. And I know that you credit, failure as being a learning experience that is equal, if not greater, to success. Tell us a little bit about that because so few people know that story as opposed to the North Face.
Well, thank you, Scott, for raising that. Arctica was a company that made a power system that was portable, that you could put in consumer goods. They had something that was ready for market, which was a lithium ion based battery pack. And behind that, they had a lot of patents around a fuel cell, but the fuel cell was not ready for market. The fuel cell was one which at the time you couldn't ship it because it was too volatile. The form factor was too large to put into products. The cost was too high. The material came from Russia and had very limited, the fuel had very limited access to that. And so they asked me to come in and help them get some sales while they were trying to build everything. And so I put a team together for them. And the idea was, okay, let's sell what we have and have a runway, and then behind that, introduce the fuel cell when the time comes about. And it wasn't going to be great. They had dreams of being a unicorn or whatever, but in the first year, we got 12 million worth of sales with this lithium ion pack, which basically went into clothing to provide power on demand to charge or run any of your devices, heat or cooling. And it was pretty cool. And the second year, we had orders for about 25 million. And as I said, it still wasn't a unicorn, but it was going nicely when we had a visit from the Apple company. And when Apple came in, the CEO of the company, who'd been an admiral in the Navy and didn't understand budgets because you always got money from the government, right? So you didn't have to worry about it. In fact, you spent your money every year, so you get the same budget the next year or more. And he said, we're going to sell this company for $100 million by the end of the year. And I said, well, I don't know that we're going to do that. Once, we hadn't seen Steve Jobs yet, but more importantly, they don't need to invest in patents. They can wait until we actually proof our concept. And he didn't believe that. And so he started spending money like a drunken sailor, pun intended. And we owed $2 million more than the company had, with his belief that all in, we're going to sell this to Apple at the end. Well, there's a lot of humorous things and a lot of touching stories in there, but the reality is it didn't happen. And I helped him raise money to be able to bridge it, even though he didn't want any money coming in. But owing $2 million, we had a lot of people, creditors at the door, including the landlord who was going to close the door. I said, we've got to raise some money. I can do it. I raised $700,000 in a space of 2 weeks, which we were theoretically going to parse out to a little bit to everybody to keep things going. And the CEO, in his great wisdoms, spent it all in one night. And we were back to where we were. We didn't have the money and whatever. At that point, I left the company. Ultimately, it went into bankruptcy, but it shouldn't have. It had everybody that succeeded. I mean, it had the head of the mechanical engineering department at Stanford involved in that, students from Stanford, students from Carnegie Mellon, students had 2 astronauts, people involved with it. But this dream that you can do anything and you don't have to worry about gravity was what took them down.
Amazing story. For anyone who wants to read more about it, get the book Almost. It's absolutely incredible. You know, I think the North Face is an iconic brand, but I don't know that everyone goes back to the beginning and realizes what an innovator and what a disruptor the North Face was at the time in the late 60s, and how you leveraged things that were being produced for the Vietnam War, and the impact that people like Bucky Fuller had on your business. Talk about that innovation and disruption that you brought to the market, because I think it's fascinating.
Well, I always had a belief that disruption was a critical element of it. And I wanted to build a brand once I'd left the family company and what I was doing. And I wanted to do it in the outdoors because I knew what made a good product and what didn't make a good product. For example, I knew that you needed to have a product that didn't fail in the wilderness because your life depended on it. And so quality was good. So I developed 3 words, which I always used, and tested everything we did against that, and ultimately developed stories around it that we could tell to other people so they would understand what the DNA of the company was. Because I always believe that brands are like coral. They grow imperceptibly changing, but if they have rules and guidelines and persistent and consistently stay with that, they start getting more and more complex and more beautiful as they grow. And that's what a brand is all about. And I believe that comes not from your quantitative goals or whatever, it comes from your DNA and understanding it. So the 3 words, which we sort of hung our hat on, our North Star, if you will, were disruption, quality, and triple bottom line. Triple bottom line being equal commitment to the people, the planet, and to profits. Well, with disruption, first it started with product. And what we did, because I had this belief that I told you about from reading the Transcendentalists like Thoreau and Wilderness and Preservation of Earth, I believed we were going to change the world. And that was our goal. And remember, I lived in Berkeley and we thought we could do it. It was the 60s. But we thought we were going to change the world. And one way that I knew was if you could send people deep into the wilderness, they were going to come back being better stewards of the earth. I knew it from a personal experience. I knew it from the reading that I had. So the challenge was, how do we get people deep into the wilderness? We were not a jacket company at that time, although if you look at it now, it's a $4 billion company. 85% of the sales are in jackets or whatever. We started out being an equipment company, making sleeping bags, tents, and packs, and some funky clothing. But what I knew was if we could make the equipment lighter, people would go further into the wilderness. They wouldn't just be people who went off the side of the road in terms of car camping or whatever. So the goal was to make it lighter. So we looked around for materials. We were able to find initially materials that were surplus from the Vietnam War. Aircraft aluminum became tent poles and pack frames. Parachute cloth became sleeping bags and tents and some funky clothing. We lightened the load by about 50% so people could go into the wilderness deeper, and also that women would join the activity. So it wasn't a beast of burden act any longer. And we did that. But because we believed in disruption, it wasn't just in product, although we continued to innovate with product and innovation. We were one of the first to use Gore-Tex, and that's a whole story in of itself. We're also, when our tent sales slowed down, I went to Bucky Fuller, the philosopher genius, and got him to collaborate with us to create an entirely new type of tent. But we looked at disruption across the entire company, because that's how you build your DNA. So first, we were omni-channel. That means we sold through our own stores, we sold through a catalog, later became e-commerce, and we sold wholesale. At that time, people said, you cannot do that, you're crazy. Well, look around now, everybody's doing it. We did it at that time, we were able to do it. similarly, because of quality and what we were trying to do, I put a lifetime warranty on all of our products. Again, most of the people, particularly the financial gurus, were telling me I was crazy. The reality is it was never more than 1.5% of sales that were charged as a result of supporting that one. So disruption we were constantly doing, whether it was our business model, the fact that we were predicating a triple bottom line strategy or whatever, that is how we went for it. So disruption and the story around disruption. Initially, we used a lot about the Vietnam War. After we worked with Bucky Fuller, for those in the know who are kind of techies, we did the Bucky Fuller story. Lots of people didn't know who he was, so it didn't have the clout that was there. In terms of quality, the initial story that we used is a lifetime warranty. We make a product that lasts forever. From a standpoint of protection in the wilderness is great, but because I was always a believer in ESG, I believe that a product that never went into the landfill was much better than one even made from recycled materials. So that was the story we did. Now, the reality is around that our warranty didn't have the clout that I thought it would. So we changed the story supporting it about, I don't know, 7 or 8 years in. The reason it didn't have the clout, the first one is the only way you prove a warranty is if you have a lot of failures. And we weren't having a lot of failures. So it was there. And then the second thing was a lot of companies, competitors, but just across all of consumer goods, were putting warranties on their product. When people went in to try to effect the warranty, they heard this, oh, I wish you were here yesterday, you're now screwed today, or whatever. Well, and so what we found was people doubted warranties, just not ours, but they didn't know about ours. So we finally came up with a story to underscore it. Because I said, we use stories to be able to use word of mouth and get the word out there. And the story was about somebody who came into our warranty department, and he had to do repair or replacement if there were a fair. And this person came in and said, listen, my tent has failed. We've been planning the trip all year long, and it's going to ruin the trip if I can't get out there. Can you get it fixed by the weekend? And Aisha, who was running the department, said, sure, we can. And we're just like you. We like to spend our time in the backwoods. And so we appreciate the problem you have. And so the guy said, well, there's one little problem. She said, what's that? He said, well, it's not your product. He said, it's one of your competitors' product. And she said, well, that's okay. We know how they make good products. We know how to fix them. We'll fix it. So, well, what's the cost? And he said, we don't charge for repairs. Well, they were probably scamming us, were scamming us or whatever, but the story kind of underscored the level we went to getting people into the wilderness and what we cared about and our commitment to the relationship with them. And
yeah,
then
there's no way that in this hour we're going to be able to pack everything in. So I would encourage you all to do a deep dive, because the things that Hap's talking about, they were so far ahead of their time. Even the things that you were doing with the Yosemite Park in those partnerships, just amazing stuff that maybe today we might take for granted, but back then, like, nobody was doing these things, and it's just incredible. When did so you bought 2 retail stores called the North Face.
right.
When did you realize, this may seem like a silly question, but when did you realize that the North Face was going to be the North Face, like the company, that this iconic company?
Well, probably when I started it, I thought it was going to be the iconic company. It just wasn't. I had this dream of what we were trying to do, and I believed in ESG as I talked about it, and a lot of people didn't. But I thought, I didn't know if we were going to be a big company, but I thought we were going to be the best company. And so it was there that I guess the pivotal point where I recognized that it was something else. I was traveling in Europe, and there was somebody on a bus where I was riding on the bus, and they had one of our packs. And so I went up to him and I said, where'd you get that? And it turns out they were from the US, they'd gotten it on the East Coast. But what I recognized then, it wasn't just my friends and the people we knew in the outdoors buying our products. It was really something beyond that. Now, there was another point which I was certain then that we were on the right track. And that is, we used to try to do, I had a pretty good feel for marketing, but a lot of it was not terribly sophisticated because we didn't have the money to do sophisticated. But we had warranty cards whenever we had the lifetime warranty. So we'd sent a message out to, I don't know, 100 people and got their feedback. And frankly, it's probably as good as you get with 10,000 the people gave us that input. But one of those told me we were on the right track. And we had a line. We said, what is your favorite product and why? Thinking that we'd make more of those and make less of the ones that are out there. And this one person said, I don't know what the North Face makes, but it makes good shit. And I knew at that point we now had the license to produce a lot of things if we stayed within the guardrails of what we were doing, because we did make good shit, and that was what we focused on. We made quality.
We have a lot of entrepreneurs on this call. What advice would you give entrepreneurs that are, just getting started and thinking about how to build a successful business?
Well, there's a great quote from Goethe, the German philosopher, that said, whatever you can do or believe you can, begin it. Because boldness has genius and power and magic in it. And that's what I do. You can sit back and theorize forever about what's going to happen. Make a product, make a service, put it out there, put a test. You're going to change, you're going to pivot. But that proof of concept as you develop it really gives you honest feedback. And I know a lot of people who are intellectually very, very bright, but they get tied up in trying to overthink and solve everything that exists out there. I was talking to a very successful venture capitalist in Silicon Valley, and I said, what do you think about business plans? We teach them where I have school at Stanford and Cal and Hult Business School. And he said, I think they're great. I never read them. I said, what do you mean? And he said, I don't want to fall in love with a business plan because I've never seen a business play out the way the initial concept was there. He said, I want to know that they can develop a business plan, but really what I want to do is fall in love with the people behind it and know that they can develop a plan so that when it hits the fan and things have to change, as they always do, that's when we want to develop a good business plan, but not at the outset.
What excites you today? I mean, one of the things that I remember, we had a wonderful conversation back in March, I think it was. And I remember getting off the call thinking, man, you got more energy and excitement and passion than the average bear for sure. I'm just curious, what is exciting you today? What gets you hopping out of bed?
Well, and it's still the same thing that when I started the North Face, I believed in environment and society. I believed in triple bottom line. I think now is a time for that. That's what gets me really excited. The last 30 years in consumer goods in particular have been devoted a lot to price, offshoring, producing things at a lower cost. And people didn't know what the all-up costs were. They didn't know the social costs. They didn't know the environmental costs. They didn't know the climate change cost. So price became kind of the determinant of what was out there. Well, as more transparency has come into the marketplace, and also as a new generation is coming in, people are realizing the impact on the climate, the impact on those other things. And as a result of it, because there is transparency, blockchain provides that. And when you look at it, the low-cost place offshore, China in particular, but India and Indonesia, the costs have all gone up dramatically because people want a better life. They don't want to be on the bottom of that rung. So the costs are going up. Consumers are now seeing it. So what I see is the next 20 or 30 years are going to be driven by ESG. So I'm excited about that. And so if companies are disruptive and involved in ESG, that's where I'm there. One company, a company called Spora Biotech out of Chile that I work with, is trying to find a replacement for leather. Actually, it's a biotech company, so they're finding materials, this mycelium, that they're using, and the mycelium being the root structure of mushrooms can be made into a variety of things. There's hundreds of thousands of species out there. The first one focused on is to replace leather, because leather is considered the fourth most environmentally destructive product that's out there because of the way it's processed and whatever. These people are actually going into the Amazon to find new species, bring it out, take it to the lab. Once it's in the lab, then they develop it into a product and do whatever. But they don't have to cut anything down to do that. So you don't have to cut the forest down. Secondly, leaving the indigenous cultures there and preserving them makes sense. Makes sense because the knowledge that the shamans have had and others of what these plants do and how they lead is also something there. So this company is able to come up with an economic way to preserve places like the Amazon while developing an alternative for an environmentally destructive product that exists out there. And leather is only one of the things. There's food, and there's pharma, there's packaging and everything that could come from it. But we got to, like every entrepreneur, you got to focus on what you focus on. Keep them the main thing, and let's get that one solved and move on. But that gets me pretty excited. And then I'm working on a company, Revive, which is out of Dubai, that's doing preventative healthcare. And the idea is that, like in the United States right now, 17.9% of our GDP goes to healthcare, and that's unsustainable. It's 9% in Europe, and that's unsustainable. But the reality is, one of the cost factors is we're dealing after the fact with health issues. And if people can do a better job of taking care of their health at the outset, then there's going to be less cost down the road. And this democratization of healthcare is there. So I referred to them a couple of times, but those two are ones I'm particularly interested in developing.
I love it. And your passion for it just speaks volumes. We have a ton of people that would love to ask you questions.
Great.
So we're gonna go first to Detroit, to an entrepreneur I have a ton of respect for who has an apparel company, Carl McAllister. You are up with Hap.
Hey, good
You
afternoon,
can
Hap.
pinch yourself.
What was that, Scott?
I said you can pinch yourself.
I know, right? Hey, Hap, thank you so much for your time, and I really sincerely enjoyed your insight thus far. And so the question that I have is, especially as an entrepreneur, our perseverance can be a gift and a curse. And so my question is, how did you know to persevere or to pivot when you had a product or a disruptive product or thought?
Well, you need to have friends, and you need to have people, not necessarily people that work for you, whether you have 5 people or 50 people or whatever, because they are biased in terms of the feedback they're going to give you. They want to sustain something that's there. Maybe it's their job, or they think it's their job or whatever. So you need to have a network of people that you can go to that will be honest with you. It's difficult to go to your family, because the family also has a bias there of what they're doing. And sometimes you don't want to tell them, I'm on this razor's edge between changing the world and us going bankrupt. And I don't know which one's going to happen tomorrow, but one of those is going to happen. Yet that doesn't make the family really comfortable. So there's some networks out there, things like Entrepreneurs Organization. EO is a good one to get involved in because it allows people who are in like circumstances, but not competitors, to talk about the situation and share that. And they can give you a pretty good feedback, because when you lay out, this is what we're doing, somebody can go, that's a round peg in a square hole. It's not going to work. So I would say that use people on the outside, and then, sure, you generate a lot of PR, but don't believe your own PR.
Awesome. Thank you.
Phenomenal advice. And thank you for the infomercial for the Outlier Project, Hap. I appreciate it. Paul in Florida, you're up.
Oh, Hap, thank you so much for your time. This has been an incredible conversation. You talked about how most of your business career, you were kind of ahead of everyone else. And I imagine that came with a lot of adversity and challenges that you had to overcome. I'm wondering if you can share with us either the most scariest or the toughest challenge that you had to overcome, and what was the most impactful lesson that you learned from it?
Well, a number of entrepreneurs, you'll know there's probably never one that stands out. That it's a series of linked recoveries as you try to go there. But the most difficult one, or one difficult one I can do, is we had a roof collapse in our factory. And what happened was, I'd worked all winter long, And raising money is horrible. Too much work, takes too long, and takes you away from doing your job. And all went along. I'd not done any skiing or anything. Finally finished the raise. We were ready for the spring delivery. I took my family. We went back to Vail, and I get a call in the morning saying, "Are you sitting down?" And I said, "Well, yes." And I said, "Well, the roof of the factory's caved in." I said, "Was this literal or figurative?" And he said, "No, it's literal. What happened is, water came in, it collected on the roof. It was so heavy, it split all the glue lamp beams. All the water came in, it fried the computers. We can't go into the factory because the fire department won't let us do that. So we can't take any product out there. We have orders to deliver, but we don't know where they're going to be. What are we going to do?" So, I mean, the first thing I did is go skiing for a day, partly because I couldn't get back that day, and that was going to be my one day for the weekend. And then because I'd had enough experience, I just believed we were going to succeed. I didn't know if the insurance company was going to reimburse us or not. That always ends up in a negotiation. But I went out and told the fabric people, we're going to be reimbursed, so just send us some more material, put us at the head. I had our salespeople go out to our customers and say, "We sent you a copy of the orders that we're going to do. Could you just send it back to us so we can confirm? And oh, by the way, we're going to be a little late with some of the things we're going to do." And I went up to the University of California, got a bunch of computer science gurus, geeks, whatever, and had them come down and just go through, see what they could make out of the computer that had been fried to be able to do that. At night, when the fire department wasn't around or looking, we had a SWAT team that went in and got product out that we took out that we could, so that we could ship some things to be there. And it was the opportunity actually to bring the team together. And everybody thought about it in a great way. We, at the end of the time, we gave out pencil holders or something that are inscribed with pictures of a broken glue lamp beam saying, "Thank you for what you did." But the people believed they could solve it, and we believed as a team that we could do it. And it goes to one philosophy, and then I'll come back because there's obviously the question. But Lao Tzu had a great quote, and he said, the leader who is feared is a bad leader. The leader who is adored is a good leader. The leader who is a great leader is the one that when it's all done, the people say, "We did it ourselves."
Beautiful. Absolutely amazing.
That's
Mark Holden in Chicago, you're up.
Mr. Hap Klopp, thank you so much for being here. I got to tell you, you have one of the coolest names I've ever spoken. It's just a cool name, let's be honest. But that's not the question. So you mentioned transcendentalism, right?
Right.
Henry David Thoreau. I certainly adore that literary movement. My oldest daughter her name is Emerson, after Ralph Waldo. And so one of the things that I personally struggle with is how to make some of the ideals of transcendentalism apply today. I mean, it is very spiritual, it's very metaphysical, but how do you incorporate such concepts in today's world with modern conveniences and, cell phones in hand? I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
It's a great question and a great observation. I believe you do it by putting it into the DNA of the company, by talking about what you stand for. And when you talk about the issues of ESG, environmental is a key component of that. And that's part of what the transcendental thing is about. It's about nature and appreciating nature and being able to recognize it. If people recognize it, it is great. And if I were to talk with some business school students, which I do on a regular basis, I don't emphasize as much the spiritual nature of it because it probably falls on deaf ears or they're saying, "Yes, but how do you make money with it?" I point out that the trend is coming to environment now. So if you're aware of it and you're aware of these things, if you're aware of the fact that taking care of the planet is going to be a huge business, that there is going to be more out there, people then look at it in a different way. So it's similar to when we use Buckminster Fuller. Any of you read Bucky Fuller, you'll be amazed. The greatest genius of our time, or one of those. And he created a whole new math because the old math system didn't work. And he said that math should be inherently rational. Every number should be discrete. Numbers like pi and 1.414 that we use in math doesn't work. So he created a whole new math around what happened in nature and did that. Well, I knew that. and all of our team we put together working with them knew that, but touting that element to the world wasn't as important as showing them something that looked really elegant and new and different. So have that in your DNA, constantly come back to that, but then figure out how you market around that, not just coming out as somebody who's a flag waiser.
Thank you.
We're going to one of my favorite outliers. He's not only an Olympic gold medalist, living in Spain, but today is his birthday. So we are going to our favorite birthday boy in Spain, Joe Jacoby. You're up. You're on mute.
Thank you, Scott, and what a pleasure to have. I have to tell you that, you know, I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area, but during my athletic career in canoeing, I really kind of cut my teeth on the Nantahala River down in Western North Carolina at the Nantahala Outdoor Center, which was really interesting place. You know, their retail operation, their store in the middle of nowhere, Appalachia, and their mail order was a really amazing way that a lot of people got exposed to the North Face, and you know, doing a pretty extreme sport, you know, far from the bigger cities in the Southeast, and you know, they'd buy their gear and then they'd go back to Atlanta and Charlotte and Chattanooga and Knoxville and these places. So I just got to tell you that fond memory for me, and just sort of seeing the way people really kind of picked up on the various outdoor brands and how they kind of left the Nantahala Outdoor Center and the gateway to play for brands like North Face. That was really cool. I loved what you actually said about healthcare and the way people take care of themselves a moment ago. I wonder, with your perspective and the lens of your own values, which of the companies that are sort of more in the similar space as North Face, up and coming companies, do you see doing a good job, you know, of, you know, really putting their values first, and you know, really seem to be kind of meeting the outdoor world where we are today? Like, if you were investing, like what are the companies, the up and comers that you like and you see in the outdoor industry?
Well, you always have to put Patagonia out there, and they're $1 billion, but they're still up and coming, and they're doing a great job of putting their values forward. There's a company called Cotopaxi, Cotopaxi. They're doing a fabulous job of what they're doing. There's a company out of South America called PACA, Paka, and what they're doing is making products out of alpaca. If you go to their website, they do transparency with respect to how the animals are raised and animal husbandry, and what the pipeline is and how that comes in to be able to deal with them. You know, those companies are really, really good. If you look at some of the other companies right now, I would say those probably stand out, but everybody, I think, is admiring what Patagonia did in terms of turning the stewardship of their company over to a foundation and tried to put the money out there where they were, because large companies can have more impact than small companies. And so the smaller companies are the ones that are fun. They're the ones, I think, that'll be the future. But out there. But those are the two that jump out. I've got a whole laundry list of others I work with.
Yeah.
People contact me all the time because they, you know, they want to be a North Face, and I tell them, don't be a North Face, be your own company.
Scott, just a really quick follow-up, and I promise I'll be short with this. I love that you said Cotopaxi. Davis is a really good friend. Do you, since you mentioned Patagonia, I was wondering if you have like a cool story, a personal story with Yvonne that you might be able to share with the group, or something that you guys collaborated on, or an experience you had together that, you know, might be sort of unique to, you know, for this group. Do you have any good stories with Yvonne or Patagonia?
Well, I mean, the simple one is that we did a new office building when we set up in Berkeley, because we kept outgrowing everything we had, and we were able to do something that had you know, a street of light in it, where you had windows that opened all the way across the top of the building, so there was fresh air and everything. And so we had a grand opening, and we brought Bucky Fuller in to talk about it. So we invited Yvonne to come up, and he came up and he looked at it and he said, "We need a new office building. We need one down there in Ventura." And so I said, "Well, whatever. I don't think the people that designed ours want to work down there." He said, "I don't need them. We've got great people, but now I can see how it impacts it." And so we went back to Ventura. And if you've ever been in their operation there, it's a great, great facility, and it really inspires people to work.
That's so cool. Thank you. Thank you so much, Hap.
Happy birthday, Joe. All right, we're going to Canada. One of my favorite guys, Hap, if you want to read a great book, Personal Socrates is a phenomenal book that Mark Champagne wrote. Mark, you're up with Hap.
Thanks, Scott. Hap, thank you. Thank you so much for your time and your energy today. And probably most importantly, for keeping me and my family dry and warm every ski season. So,
Right.
especially in Canada, we've got a lot of that. So thank you. My question is, no doubt, I mean, you've got such a great energy and motivation. I'm just curious, to have that longevity and that energy. Is there anything that you've noticed that you prioritize for the health of your mind, like any practices or rituals and that are practical and consistent that just keep you sharp and the mind healthy?
Good question. Very good observation. By the way, where are you in Canada?
I am just outside of Toronto, Blue Mountain.
Okay.
area.
But when you said that, I was thinking about another environmental company that I think is doing great, but it's on the other side of the country. It's a company called Ecologist, and
Okay.
they're out of Victoria and Vancouver. They're doing it. But anyway, that diverts. The practice I have, the first one is being curious about everything and surrounding myself with new people. So I'm excited about it. Frankly, as you can see from my gray hair, I'm in a peer group with a lot of people that are complacent, and they kind of think, well, I had mine, I'll get mine, that's it. And they don't have commitments there. So I try to be around young people. I teach, and I teach at universities to give back, but at the same time to get from that. I learn about new things. I wouldn't be as involved with AI as I am other than being that. And I have no interest personally in cryptocurrency, but I had to learn about it as a result of doing that. And I'm curious and read that, but by surrounding myself with young people who are doing it, it is great. And then the other one is that I get up early and attack the day because my body clock seems to work that way, but I get a good chance to take control of my life for a few hours before everything starts coming in a big way. And I think that's helpful. So I'm more proactive rather than reactive to be able to do that. And then for whatever reason, I believe it's healthy to throw yourself into something that you don't know what you're doing. For example, this TED Talk that I'm going to be doing. I've never done a TED Talk before. I've done a lot of speaking, but I've never done a TED Talk. So why not do one and see what that's about and see how they do it and how it's different and the challenges of doing it in a different way that's out there. And by putting myself in an environment where I don't know what's going to happen, it is an environment that then I really am attenuated to think, quick, how do I put this thing together? I know I can do it, but how and when and why?
God, incredible. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Hap, we've got a gentleman on with us today. I don't think he has a question, but his name's Robert Hamilton Owens. And at 71, he decided, why don't I spend 43 days rowing across the Atlantic Ocean? So we've got some unbelievably interesting people that are very like-minded to yourself. Amazing.
Congratulations.
Folks.
That's great.
Yeah, he is one of a kind, one of one. Jamie Headley in Detroit, you're up.
Hi, Hep. So great to get to meet you. So my question is, what advice would you give an entrepreneur? So had gone through, had some success, stepped back, knows that if they're going to re-engage and really take a company someplace, they need help, right? They can't wear all the hats and do it all. So what would be your advice around getting a coach or a consultant? And if it's a small fledgling business, how does that work in terms of payment? Do coaches take then, I'll do this for a % of ownership, or I'll help with investors and then payment there? How does that work, and what advice would you give?
Well, there's a variety of ways that it comes in, and I don't think anything classically has been written out what you do. Oftentimes, a new company cannot afford cash-wise an investor, so or advice, so they use them as an investor, perhaps providing options to them, which is a good way to do that. Or they do things where there's some payment down the road in some other way to be able to conform what they're doing. Clearly, when you're at the beginning of a company, you can't afford as many people as you need. You have to wear a lot of hats, but you're probably only good at some of those. And so then how do you do it? Well, one way is you can bring in some people who are working on an intern basis, maybe students just out of school. There's some risk there, but in certain capacity, for example, if you were talking about social media, whatever, somebody just out of school might be a good contributor to it. Not what you would think in terms of a classic advisor for a business program, but could help you in that direction. And they are looking for something on their resume, their CV, that you can provide them to be able to do that. And so the first thing to do is step back from saying, well, I'm going to have to engage everybody with money that I either don't have or that is very precious for me, and say, what else can we provide them to be able to do that?
Excellent. Thank you.
Great advice. We're going to New York. CC, Karen Cooper, you're up.
As someone who grew up in the 80s and lived for your jackets, I just want to say it's a beyond pleasure to meet you. You kept me warm through all the New York winters, so thank you. And I very much contributed to that, the $4 billion. That being said, totally did. That being said, and still do, Mark actually took my actual initial question, but you're talking a lot about, in the beginning, you talked about kids and AI and job skills, and you teach and you surround yourself with young kids. So as a mom of a 17-year-old soon to be graduating from high school, and then a daughter who just graduated from college, I need to talk, a lot of questions were surrounding entrepreneurs, but you're surrounding yourself with young people, you're teaching these young people. What are you teaching them? What are you talking to them about? What are you saying to them in this new and interesting world that we're currently living in, with AI and just everything at their fingertips? What guidance, what advice are you giving to them? What's the one big thing you're telling them?
There's a couple levels of advice. I mean, the first one, and I serve this purpose wherever I go, is that people look at me and say, God, if he can do it, I can do it. And if you tell the kids, if you can, that is something they should know. It isn't like it's out there, it's inside all of us. And I think also, I wrote the book almost about failure. And the reason I did, I'd already written one about success, but, as one of the agents once told me, he said, go into the bookstores, how many racks do you see about failure and how many racks do you see about success? And I said, well, maybe that you need more books about failure. He said, well, I'm not sure that's the case. Well, I do think it's the case. And I think that you're going to fail, not you, but all of us, at new things we try and new ideas. And failure should not be the end. Failing forward is the way to go. One of the fears that many young people have is, well, if I do it wrong, what's going to happen? And if you're going to be an entrepreneur, that's not a very good attitude to have. When I speak at like Stanford Business School and Harvard Business School, MIT, one of the things I tell them is I say, you're trying to be entrepreneurs, you're screwed. You've spent your whole life doing it correctly, right? Your parents wanted you to get into the right grade school, middle school, or whatever. You're always rewarded for doing it. You never want to screw up. You go to college. Now you're thinking of your graduate degrees. And if you ever did anything wrong, you're lost. And so now you're going to start a business where 80% fail. And on top of that, you're going to have to pivot 2 or 3 times. I said, that's not a very good background for it. So I would encourage them to believe that it's okay to fail, not fail in a big way. Cut your losses when you're there, but it's okay to try something and do something new. And then what I would encourage them to do is follow their passion, identify what it is that they really care about. I've got 3 grandsons, and they're all entirely different, but they're all kind of dedicated to doing what they're doing. One's studying in Madrid right now, and he's into architecture and entrepreneurship. Another one is a professional soccer player, and he sat down at age 10 and said, I want to play pro soccer. And he wrote down his goals, and he pursued those goals. He went to Stanford because he wanted a degree, but he raced through in 3 years because he didn't want to be too old to get on the pro circuit, and was able to sign a contract to move forward. And the fourth one is an eighth grader, and he believes in STEM, and that's his thing. And he's in the robotics club, and is in engineering, and he's doing all of it. The common thread is, yes, you can do it. Yes, you should try to do it. Focus on the things that you really enjoy and that you are more into than anybody else, and you're going to be good at it. And recognize right now, you don't have to be right in the first job or the second job. The average person in the US right now is going to have 12 jobs in their adult life. And it comes from a variety of things. The average age of a company has dropped from 67 years to 15 years. The length of time that people spend in a job is going to be tied to technology a lot of times, and technology is changing too much, so you move on somewhere else with what you're doing. So the reality is, if you don't get it right the first time, or you don't get it right the second time, you still have another shot at it.
Love
Such
that.
good advice.
Thank you.
Such good advice. Our cleanup hitter today is the good Colonel in Illinois. Colonel Scott Heathman, you are up.
Thank you so much. Hap, it is absolutely wonderful to meet you. And there's a couple of us on the line here who, Jack, you grew up or was raised in Spokane. I was stationed in Spokane twice, and I would go back in a heartbeat. And if Charlie Wolf gives you any problems at the Spokane TEDx, you let me know, because he's a good friend of mine out there. So you're going to do fantastic.
Great.
I'm going to take Karen's question and go on the opposite end of the spectrum. And I want you to imagine you're in a theater full of CEOs leading in today's environment, current CEOs. What would you tell them as far as leadership advice or skills that they need to either double down on or invest in themselves to lead effectively today?
Well, it's a really broad question, Colonel, but I mean, the first one is, I don't believe people follow people, they follow visions. And so what you need to do is craft a vision. And I talk about storytelling. That's a way you get the vision across to somebody. Don't do it just because there's hierarchy there. And if you're in the military, if you're the general dictates to the colonels, and the colonels do whatever, the admiral's doing that. Society doesn't quite work like that. People question it all the time, and you need interaction and feedback. And if you're doing that, you have to motivate them other way than, I control your destiny. People now believe they control their own destiny. So what you have to convince them of is what the vision is and why it's worthwhile to be on board with you. The second thing is that you have to be able to be flexible and be able to change. We spend so much time convincing our troops, our people, about the business plan we have, that we almost get trapped into doing that when the environment maybe changes on the outside. So you have to be able to tell your people, we're believing this now, but we have to continue to look at it because we have to grow. And when we're going to grow, things are going to change. One of the problems that almost all big businesses face is there's resistance to new. And even though there's a lot of R&D that's developed, it seldom gets to the marketplace because of the internal resistance to adopting or jumping into something new. That, in theory, large companies should always beat entrepreneurs, but entrepreneurs win because of the internal tension. Just one idea or one example of that is that when you're doing really well with a business, you should steal money from that to be able to invest in new ideas. And there's a lot of resistance because the people making a lot of money say, we should get bonuses, everything should go, give us more money. Why are you taking it and putting it in something where there's an 80% chance of failure? And you have to convince them that in those ideas, we're going to have some that are going to be the future of the company tomorrow. Example of that is Kodak. In 1998, Kodak had 177,000 employees. Some of the brilliant minds that existed there, great R&D. In fact, they happen to have most of the digital patents that exist. They made so much money on photo processing that the digital patents were put on the back shelf and they didn't change. Today, Kodak has 2 employees, and they're collecting royalties on the digital patents that they had. A company has to do that. So if you're going to be a great leader, you have to recommend to everybody that we look at everything we do, throw away some of the things that aren't working, and invest in some new things that are uncertain, but we think there's a probability of success.
No, thank you, sir.
Incredible advice. Hap, we had one more person raise their hand. Can we sneak in one more question?
Sure.
Jerry in Chicago, you're up. I don't want you to be mad at me, so you're up
I'm
with
not
Hap.
mad. Hap, I just love all this. Thank you. I'm so curious. You mentioned building the big, beautiful office and how happy everyone was working there. So what are your thoughts about remote work now and people not working together in a lot of companies?
I think it's going to be a blend. I think that remote has its benefits, but it has its drawbacks. It's difficult to create socialization at a distance. And so you have to bring people together, but you don't necessarily have to be together 5 days a week or 6 days a week. You can be together 3 days a week and be able to pull some of that off. It just means you have to work harder at some of the things that you lose when they're out there. The other thing to recognize is it isn't as necessary for people who've been around for a long time to be in the office as much. It's the new people who are trying to figure out what is the culture, what's the DNA, what does it stand for? But they're also looking for people to be a coach, to be a mentor, to be an advisor to them. And it's tough to find those online. You have to kind of get together. So even though some of the older people maybe don't necessarily need to be in for some of those elements, they need to be in terms of team building. I think it's inevitable we're going to have remote work. I think hybrid is the technique that's going to play out. Exactly how that is probably going to change industry by industry to be able to do that.
Great thoughts on remote. Hap, this hour flew by. I can't thank you enough for carving out time to spend with the Outlier Project. Not only the people that were on the call, but those that couldn't join us. So we have people in 34 countries and hundreds of members that will watch this on replay. An absolutely fascinating hour, and I would encourage everybody, do a deep dive, because we just got a little tip of the iceberg today. But I really appreciate you, Hap, for hopping on with us.
Well, thank you, Scott. It's a pleasure being here. And I am on LinkedIn. People can reach me there. And as you said, there's a couple of books out there. If you want to read about success, read Conquering the North Face. Want to read about failure, read Almost. And, it's a balance. You're going to have both of those. So it's there. But glad to help out in any way I can.
We appreciate it, and we can't wait for the TED Talk. So we'll be definitely taking a look at that. If you do buy his book, please leave a review on Amazon. I know it means a lot to all authors. So Hap, thanks again for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Take care, everyone.